Hey, Andy, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Sure. Well, name's Andy Zambito. I'm currently the Chief Sales Officer for the Americas at Creatio, which is a global software provider in the CRM and BPM space. We're in the low-code movement, so it's an exciting place to be. But I've been in sales now for over 20 years, and have seen the journey from custom software to perpetual and off-the-shelf SaaS and everything in between. So it's been a good journey.
And why sales? What excites you about sales?
I come from an interesting background where I kind of fell backwards into sales like a lot of folks. It wasn't, originally I was going to do a career in the military. Then I got an MBA in investment finance, and I was going down that path. And, it was a unique opportunity. I was not happy in my early 20s, probably about 22. I finished grad school, was working in finance, and realized that the part of the job I enjoyed the most was getting out and interacting with the CFOs I was interviewing and the rest. And an opportunity presented itself where I could combine a bunch of unique aspects of my background and do it. I jumped at the chance and never looked back. And I'd say my earliest experiences were ironically some of the hardest. For sales. If I look back, one of the first things I had the opportunity to try to sell was an artificial intelligent decision support system. This is before the days of data science. And talk about something that I can't show it to you, I can't demonstrate it.
Yeah.
You have to take my word for it, and the results aren't going to come for 6 months to a year after everything's trained. But trust me, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
That was, I guess, a good early experience for learning what sales was all about. Right? It's not selling until they say no.
And what was the motivation to get into leadership?
That actually is an interesting story too, in the fact that I rejected sales leadership for a long time. And part of that was when when you're young and you're doing really well and you're a hotshot rep, you're saying, okay, I'm making a lot of money. I don't have to deal with anyone else's problems and all the rest. For me, it came about because I felt challenged, right? The companies were doing well. I was building these deals that were helping propel the companies, but I didn't necessarily always agree with every decision that was being made in the leadership room.
Yeah.
And I had to look in the mirror hard and say, I have no room to challenge those decisions if I'm not willing to put myself in the room. And that was the first big catalyst that says, okay, let's do that. And I didn't know when I first did it if I would enjoy the aspect of not having the highest paycheck on the team and helping see other people be successful and helping them get there. If I would enjoy kind of the teaching and other aspects. And I ended up embracing it quite fully. So it was quite the experiment, challenge to myself, and then really embraced it and haven't looked back. It's been quite
And
rewarding.
what was that first year like? What did you like? What did you
Of
not
moving
like?
into sales leadership.
Yeah.
Wow, it was really difficult because it wasn't the typical, here, take over a team. It was actually take over a team of your peers,
Oh
of the
boy.
people you've been alongside of.
Yeah.
And it gave me the first real showcase of the first test of a sales leader is, do you add value, right? You're always on a team talking to each other about how this sales leader or that leader doesn't really add any value to, and they come along and they screw up your deals and you want to keep them out. And now all of a sudden you're responsible for those who are working alongside you and know everything about you. And I was very proud, I guess, of the fact that I was able to deliver value to each of them in that sense. One of the first times I took the next step of leadership was also really telling when, it happened during one of those exodus moments where a leader, is leaving the organization, you move up, and everybody kind of walks out the door with them that they had recruited, and you learn quickly, you don't really, it's not, the message I got was, it's not your team, you didn't, you don't just inherit them, you got to go build your own. And so that stuck with me as well.
And let's start with the first one, because that is hard because people look at you as a peer and now you're the leader.
Right.
How did you build their trust? How did you build their confidence in you
Sure.
that you can add value and not just collect expense reports and expedite internal orders? And
There was the added benefit, obviously, in that scenario was that I had established credibility because they'd seen me, I had been, I guess, top performer on the team repeatedly. And so they knew that I was doing something that was working for me. I think the big test is, for anybody going into sales leadership, I say one of the biggest challenges is, are you capable of dissecting what has made you successful? Is kind of step one. Step two is, are you able and capable of conveying that to others? And then the third challenge is, can you convey that to others who don't necessarily pattern match with you? Meaning, you find a lot of early sales leaders, they'll just try to hire everybody that looks like mini versions of themselves, and they don't know how to work with somebody who doesn't respond to the same stimulus the same as they do. So for me, I've always viewed myself in a leadership role as I'm a member of the sales organization that sits on an executive staff. I'm not an executive staff member that sits on the team. And I start from my early days of military leadership training and I'll never ask a team member to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And when I ramp sales managers, I make sure they've actually kind of proven and established that they've done it. So therefore they can actually be more productive and understand the process, and not just kind of hold some ethereal sales process over somebody as opposed, and training over them, as opposed to saying, I actually understand how to get things done on top of all of those bigger picture strategy items to make you better in what you do, but I'm also going to be effective tactically, not just strategically, in helping you execute. I think all of that combined to helping. I don't think I'm, God's gift to leadership or to sales, but I do view it and hold myself accountable to deliver value, at least in every moment, and to be very empathetic with never losing sight of what it feels like to be in the trenches. It's why I think I've been effective even at writing comp plans and the rest, right? I can see it from both sides, my finance background and the rep's perspective, and maximize that.
And how did you put in, like, because there's typically deals have a particular process.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the reps have different styles. Some
Right.
are relationship, some are more account managers, some are, the
Right.
hunter go top down, bottom up. How do you communicate with those reps on the things that they're missing?
Sure. It's not so much that. I mean, I think there's a number of things, right? There's all these methodologies that all ultimately, if you boil them down, my perspective is they all still fall under the traditional solution selling, consultative selling, whatever overarching framework. And all of these new elements that have brought in, like challenger sale or medpick, are really still, for me, components inside this. Meaning, I have this overarching sales methodology. Medic is to me, I would define it as a qualification methodology. Challenger is a communication methodology. They all have their place inside of this, and understanding kind of where somebody has their strengths and challenges is important. I can help a rep dissect a deal in a number of dimensions. Where I've discovered that I have to do more on the hiring side are the areas that can't be coached and taught. So I kind of go upstream from this in the hiring aspect, because I've learned, if you look across all the dimensions that make a rep successful, we all know what many of them are, and there's hard and soft skills. But I break it down also separately as to what is teachable and what isn't, what has to be innate, right? Meaning, because I can't teach a rep empathy. I can't teach them intellectual curiosity. I can't teach these certain things that are going to be critical to their success, and frankly, to my ability to coach and mentor. And so if those aren't there, it's trying to get a level deeper than saying, is somebody coachable? Well, why or why not are they? And what are these things that are missing, right? If you're only going to absorb the information I give you and not get curious about it and go do more work on your own, you're not intellectually curious, that's only going to take me so far. Yeah. And if you can't understand, because of the lack of empathy, what I'm trying to communicate to you or the customer's communicating, it's a dead end. And it's just not going to be somebody that, in my opinion, that you can coach up to the levels of great success. Everything else I actually feel is quite teachable. And the most important part, though, for me is there are those who are stubborn in their route. As you said, this is the way I've done it. And
the worst is
when they found, yeah, they find false positives, right? I do the wrong thing. I had success. Now I'm reinforcing it.
I got to do it again.
Yeah, but why would I listen to something new? And so you have to do it in ways that say, look, I know you don't necessarily even want to do this. We're going to do it together. Here's why. You have to understand and unpack it for them so they understand the motivations, and then demonstrate quick success with it. When they've seen that there is that quick success, then any natural rep, their path is going to be what's the shortest, most efficient path to the money and success. Then it becomes self-replicating. Yeah. If it's not, you're consistently trying to do this from the outside, and it's just ineffective.
Now, if you have somebody on the team that has those things that you feel can't be taught, is it cut and run, or is it marginalize, or?
No, I'm not a fan of marginalizing people. Meaning, if you, I view this as nobody likes firing or letting people go or putting people on plan, but it is a truism that both parties want to be or should want to be wildly successful.
Yeah.
And so, if there isn't a path for that individual, you're not doing them any favors by dragging it out. I instruct managers on, you don't put somebody on a plan that you don't have faith that they're going to succeed on the plan. If that's the case, then you should cut. And
Yeah.
it's not just to save yourself that hassle, it's for them,
It is.
because you're just wasting their time as well, and they're not going to make any money or advance their career, and it's not helpful. With some of those things, I think you have an opportunity, you have an obligation in sales leadership to expose them to what may be missing and what's lacking and why it's important, and the rest, and give it an opportunity to see if they can make that adjustment. But to your point, if it is something that just is fundamental to your business, they're not empathetic, they're not hearing the customer, you can sit through these meetings and all the rest, then no, you're going to end up brute forcing it. And what'll end up happening is now they're a net negative, not a force multiplier. You have to be present in everything in order to get it forward.
Yep.
And now you're less effective, they're less effective, and it becomes a drag on all parties. And so I would, at that point, find a better path for both of you.
And what, or how do you determine that in the interview process so that you don't hire them and then find out? Because
yeah, that's obviously, like, interviewing and hiring is one of the most difficult things. I learned early on, I think if anybody tells you they're great at this, they're probably not, being honest with you. And that shooting better than 50 or 60% is fairly exceptional. And nowadays, because it's a seller's market, right? The candidates are driving a lot of this. Everybody's hiring right now. You have to have compressed processes. So what I try to do is, in a hiring process, is not have everybody do the same interview or break apart. You look for this, you look for that. Create some scoring criteria that aligns with your corporate culture, aligns with the things that you think are going to be successful, and everybody scores against that. But you have different interview experiences. So, one will be a very unstructured interview, one will be a structured interview. And in that structured interview, you can unpack a lot of things demonstrably. If I ask a rep in an interview to take a deal and let's do an account review and walk me through one of your great wins, I will learn everything in a short period of time around their process, how they risk manage, how do they collaborate, like all these things through natural questions that you would ask in a normal, just, tell me about this win. Yeah. That unpacks a lot. So I think figure out for your organization what are those most important elements and kind of bury them into these different conversational aspects, but with high degree of intentionality to get at that. I think that there are some things, obviously, that until, you're hiring salespeople is more difficult because they always play up. So the other so they're selling themselves. That's the product of the moment, and that makes it extremely difficult because then versus almost any other interview, a developer, you can give them a development test. I would caution a hiring manager on saying, if somebody feels, if you know that they're playing up, the challenge is that somebody who appears like a B player, maybe a C player that's playing up. The challenge is then saying two people look like an A, which one played up to it, which one is, right? And so you want to dissect in that realm, and anything short of that, kind of, if you find yourself convincing yourself on the candidate, they're probably not the right candidate. And so I advise also for hiring managers not to sell, right? I am very transparent and I gauge reactions versus I'm going to sell you on why this is, because now you've created misset expectations and you have reverse selection. They're going to sell to your target, try to get the job, and then say it's not what you positioned, and now you're different.
Well, I think you have a good point with the unteachable, but identifying those things, coachability, empathy, curiosity.
Mm-hmm. So empathy, is tricky, but you can get at that through some questions. Just, again, going back to the deal review, or going back to, I ask a lot of why questions. My opening question in any interview is always the same. Why is now the right time for you to make a change? I will react to certain things in the meeting and also see how they react to my reactions, right? I mean, can they read me? Yeah. Can they understand? Can they dissect what is the intentionality behind my questions? it gets to a larger picture of something I learned early on that was a real struggle for me to get to. I didn't have anybody who could teach me. I remember having to dissect this myself with my sales engineer on the road one day. We stayed up all night in a hotel boardroom trying to figure out why in some meeting rooms we were a winning team by all measures, but we could go in and deliver a pitch and it would resonate and everybody would be shaking their head, and we could do the same exact amazing pitch, want a high five at the end, and people are looking around dumbfounded. And what I was able to unpack was that, was that the audience is coming to the table with a set of predisposed ideas, education, everything else. And before my message could land, and I kind of describe it as I'm putting these points on hooks on the wall, and I look at the end and everything I put there is on the floor, it's because their hooks were over here. So you have to go and kind of unhook it first, remount everything, and then, so I have to get to what's underneath it all. If a rep in an interview isn't able to kind of work with me and discern what is the intentionality behind my questions, what is the predisposition of what I'm looking for, and so they're not getting through that, it is an indication that they're challenging in this area of being able to read their customer, understand that there may be there always are hidden objections that they're not going to mention, that their questions are designed to get to in a very inoffensive way. And if they don't proactively address that, they're allowing them to leave the room with those objections. And that's a degree of empathy test, if you will, or check.
Because what you want to do is find, like one of my closing questions when I was interviewing was like, describe your top rep.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be pointing at myself while they were doing it to subconsciously have them thinking about me while they're describing it.
Match it to you, sure.
But well, tell me about the difference in your mind between an A and a B.
Wow. Well, it's kind of like, the classical definition of an A, because everybody says, what is an A? And there really is a definition, is that it has a 90% probability of being in the top 10% of their band. So it doesn't mean that a BDR needs to perform as a field AE rep, but inside of that band, you should have a 90% expectation that they're going to be in the top 10%. And we all want kind of A players, and we all want those kind of rock star superstars. And there's really kind of, you can have both types, meaning a consistent performer can be an A versus the person who's always, 200% of their number is obviously an A, but that's an outlier. You're not going to have all of those. Therefore, there are things that obviously we look at in our profession, like what was your track record, all of this. I like to look at, what was your highest earnings year, right? Do you have an outlier year though that can demonstrate, and then what drove that? Was that like, somebody else did a deal that fell in your lap or something else? I mean,
big company.
But underneath that, when you unpack the rest is one way you can proxy check this, in my opinion. You can't do this for all roles, because if you're hiring only cybersecurity over and over and over again, it's hard to test this. But I find that if a candidate has been able to demonstrate changing industry, changing vertical, changing product set from a customer-facing app to an IT-facing app, and has been able to repeat their success, then you at some point, and if they can do that, if they've done that more than twice, this is a real pattern that you have to pay attention to, and then you can dissect kind of how did they get there, right? Most rep stories in this will reveal it. If somebody has changed jobs, every year, and they claim they were always a top performer, it's very hard to tell from the evidence whether that's true or not, because they've never been somewhere long enough to establish that track record. And so it's what I equate it to is I say, I bet on the jockey, not the horse. So a company can be wildly successful, right? And everybody enjoys that ride, and you can't discern. And sometimes managers are like, well, I want somebody who came from that company because look how successful they are. And the reason I say jockey and the horse is, a horse gets trained, it can run, the mile track, but you make it wet, you go a mile and a quarter or something else, it can fall apart. The best jockeys can run any of those races. You say, what are the dimensions? What are the parameters? What's my horse? And find a way to win. That to me is a big telling point, because again, what can you teach? What can you not teach? This person has demonstrated they can learn a new industry. I don't have to worry about, do you have industry experience? Because inside of 6 months, it's going to be old hat to them, because they've proven they can do that. but their motions, their self-drive, their ability to find ways to win will be there. And then you can look at, okay, they've managed to do all of that without having the tools that I can give. If I can give them more infrastructure, if I can give them more process, if I can help coach around some of their challenges, what more could we get out of them, or how can we make that more repeatable and efficient? And that's an exceptional find. That's what you really target.
And how do you judge that will versus the skill? Because one without the
Well, I didn't know we were going to get
others.
all about interviewing, because this is one of the
Well,
hardest
there's
things
such
anybody can do,
gold.
and certainly haven't cracked the code on all of this. I'm just sharing kind of some of my lessons. Uh, you know, asking people why they left each of the companies and why they chose the next one they went to
Yeah.
is usually informative about, are they a driver versus a passenger? Like, oh, I just followed my leader everywhere he went. Wait a second, help me understand this. You were 150% of your number and they left. Why would you leave though? Isn't that what you're trying to do with your career? Are they, and so there's a degree of kind of passivity, or are they making these determinations for themselves? And are they, when they've made those moves, are they moving towards something, or are they running away from something?
Yeah. Cool. And what makes a great CRO in your perspective?
Well, I really think that when you're at the leadership levels where you're interacting with the other departments, it really needs to be about collaboration. And it's part of it is the organization's doing of, are all departments held accountable, or is just sales? And that's a hard thing to find, right? Because there's only one of us that tends to have a scoreboard. And
That's
if the engineer,
tangible.
if you
Yeah.
can say that it's hard to be a good CRO if all my deals are tied to the newest feature that's due to come out, but engineering can just push that and I'm still accountable for the number and
Of course.
there's no repercussions. But if you're saying inside of a world where all these things are there, I think it does require, in the modern era now, of not just being an excellent operator, you need a degree of being data focused, right? Because in the CRO function specifically, it's everything from demand gen all the way through to success in some areas. And so trying to remove ambiguity is important. Trying to get yourself to a modelable world where you have meaningful early indicators and KPIs, and are looking at juggling all these areas, and really understanding that an army moves on its stomach, right? So you can't just, we've all seen that leader that says, oh, I need to do 10 million, hire 10 reps, give them $1 million quota each, and you get there. As opposed to, no, I understand from looking at the data that we need this amount of leads in advance of this, takes this long for different types of leads. Like really unpacking and understanding the moving parts
Yep.
throughout the system is important. I think when you're an early rep, you kind of think, oh, some people are just spreadsheet jockeys, and they might be if they're just looking at
The
the
numbers
pipeline, and
instead of what's behind them.
yeah, if they're just beating on the ops and doing that, the operations. And this is the whole I think a good CRO ties in with the whole movement towards revenue operations being a thing, right? I mean, it's a thing because so much of the business has changed. Sales cycles have compressed. How buyers investigate products and do research has changed. So in the traditional CRO world of having to do everything from demand generation on one side to brand awareness to the rep and customer journey, if you don't understand this journey, then, and particularly for your organization, you can't map the right organization to it. So understanding, how do I get from A to B on scale? What type of scaling are we trying to do will dictate the type of sales reps you have. The customer journey is going to dictate where and how your sales reps interact with them. And are there different roles and functions? Is it product led? Is it sales led? And all of that. And then of course, going upstream into the demand. If you aren't able or aren't willing to kind of unpack and get into those areas, I think it's going to be really challenging for you to be successful in that role.
I like that point, because too many people wanted to model their perception of it, not them try and understand it.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, so it sounds like you have a good understanding of the marketing role as well.
Well, I've never been the primary marketeer, if you will, in my career. So I certainly understand the need for professionals, and I've worked with some truly phenomenal people in that space. I do think it requires a good CRO has to actually cross over, right, from the sales versus marketing adversarial relationship and say this is a joint effort. And the number one ways I've found to do that is, number one, make it collaborative, but make it data driven, but remove I think this adversarial nature comes from two primary areas: the need of ownership of who's going to own what parts of this and therefore get credited to this, as opposed to saying, look, collectively, we need this number of leads, whatever. Not, that's not a lead, that was trash. This one is a lead, I've done my part, you guys can't close it, and all the rest of this, and kind of break down those barriers. I really believe that the genesis of why we had a CRO was this, right? If you had VP of marketing and VP of sales, you've created this boundary, and they're both responsible. They have two different data sets, two different systems they're operating on, two different operating flows, and they're held to two different metrics.
Yes.
A CRO, I think if I went back far enough and you said, well, who was the first CRO, technically, like, it would probably be the first person who said, this is nonsense. Let's put somebody responsible for both of these because it's for the same goal, right? And so if we do that, then we say, okay, there are parts that are measurable, parts that are unmeasurable. Let's agree on what's measurable. Let's work from the same data set and understand each other better on this and come to the right definitions that we both share. To the degree you maintain this as a siloed environment and with two separate set of objectives, I don't see how you can be successful in that role. So yes, I don't think that I'm a brilliant marketeer, but I have crossed over and appreciate their world and say it's not an us and them, it's a we, right?
Well,
If
yeah.
you don't do that, I mean, because ultimately marketing and sales are trying to get the same objective. They just have different pieces of that puzzle. And looking them as two separate and disconnected functions, I think, is the biggest risk you have.
Well, that's it, because the CEO certainly doesn't understand marketing in most cases, but they know what revenue is, easily to measure. A lead can be anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You can go scrape LinkedIn all day and you got leads, right?
And
But
your
they're not.
salespeople will fight you back and forth. That's not a lead, right? Because they're thinking of the Glengarry leads, right? I mean, it's somebody who wants to buy
Right.
versus a name in a database.
And it's even worse than that, because the SDRs are now busy with contacts and not leads.
Well, and which department owns the BDR function? You see, so, I think the crossover between these two, if you said, okay, we're still going to have separate leadership, is to bring it down into a growth function. And do you as an organization, is your growth only on the front end, or is it also on the back end? And that's why CS gets involved in this journey, and we have the bow tie, and all the rest of these things have changed. And what we find ourselves in is, now the market has changed, our functions have changed, but the systems with which we manage that haven't. And the old mentalities haven't necessarily changed. And that's why I think you have these challenges. If you break down those barriers and you actually see it for what it is, then you can come to a unified definition. Okay, fine, you can call it a lead, we're going to call it a lead. What's an SQL? What's an SAL? Let's get into what actually matters for driving the business, not the things that are unmeasured, right?
Yeah.
There's another part of marketing that's going to work on AR, PR, and brand and all the rest, and that's super important, but a lot harder to measure and different to measure, and doesn't meet that intersection of sales the same way. So that's an area that I would focus.
And has the finance background helped or hurt in sales?
Oh, it's been hugely helpful. Particularly in the early days, I found that I was doing something that others weren't, right? Because at that point, I was inclined to understand the numbers. It was like, well, why are you even doing this? And you naturally ask harder questions that reps always want to hear the yes answers. And what they really need to be shopping for is the no's. If we say that selling starts with a no, right? Otherwise it's order taking, then I should be looking for the no's, not did you like what you saw, but why wouldn't you do this, right? And starting to challenge that. And it also helped me formulate the business cases in the early days, right? Of building ROI models and other things to have a credible conversation when it got to the money man. Because if you think about the early days for us folks with either no hair or gray hair, it was in perpetual software and things like that. It was really high ticket prices and really long horizons, and so there needed to be a justifiable ROI, and you were going to run up against that wall. And if you weren't paying attention to that and weren't challenging them on why would you even do this and does this make sense, you either could have a really long sales cycle that goes nowhere, or you can get to the end and lose because you haven't established a case around why your product differentiated and delivered that value in a credible fashion by understanding how a finance person is going to reject all these soft ROI points that you can't harden.
Well, and that's what I'm finding with most enterprise reps is they don't understand what finance needs for the audit
Hmm.
and for the board
Yeah,
and to put in the file. And you can think of it as just busy work, but someone has to do it.
right. I think that this is a bit of a function of where the buying journey has changed super rapidly underneath our feet, right? I mean, from the days of nine boxing and all the rest to now, you don't have the opportunity. They're not going to engage at the same level and answer these questions. And things that were part of our almost like a requirement in sales training and all the rest, it gets somewhat overlooked now because in the days of a product-led sale and some SaaS motions are just so fast, they're more transactional. If you then say, okay, well, let's look at the enterprise versions, those that are longer and all the rest, I think so much focus has been paid to the product and is the product going to get there and meet these needs and all the rest? Or there's still a lot of attention in the sales model of political, right? Are you getting high? Are you getting deep? Are you getting wide? Are you doing all of that? Okay, but now you got there. You're in the room. We don't spend enough time with what are you going to do with that time, right? As we get to that leadership and just get the meeting. Okay, you're in the meeting. Now,
Now
how is it
what?
compelling, right? Now, what's the compelling thing? And we don't spend enough time, I think, connecting those dots. And so I don't necessarily hold it against them. I think that, more junior reps coming up, they just haven't been exposed to that. They haven't
Right.
been trained on that. And I would encourage sales enablement teams to make a point of it, right? Nowadays you have things like, Simon Sinek out there with Start with Why and Golden Circle. I mean, so ask the why, like why do this
Yeah.
project at all? Hey, I'm happy to be in the room with you and do this presentation today, but why is this important to you? You can then get to and why do anything? Why do this versus something else? It starts to get to unpack value at a high level, and then now you have some material to anchor to start asking the questions of, what is the value of that to you? As as the old pain impact kind of questions. But
Right.
we tend to do just enough to advance the sales cycle,
And that's it.
as opposed to realizing at the end you still have to come around and justify the whole thing. So I've gotten to the end, and they're like, okay, but. And you want to be prepared to walk in proactively with that. Yeah, I think it's just an area that, to your point, what makes an A player? I guess somebody who can also see these different aspects,
The
right? That
business
there's
side of
that
it.
beyond the person in the room they're talking to.
Perfect. Hey, Andy, I really appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
Sure. Well, I'm on LinkedIn as Andy Zambito. I'm a.zambito@creatio.com. If you'd like to reach out to me at work. If you have some exceptional reps, we're hiring. I'm growing all over the Americas, is my charter. And I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you today and would love to connect with anybody that'd like to further the conversation.